Hi everyone, I'm Karen Egan, and I'd like to introduce our MUFIC Songwriter of the Month for February 2022, Pernell McDaniel. How are you doing today?
Great, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's great to have you here. So tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you grew up.
Well, when I was born, we lived in a small town, South Carolina, in Aiken County, South Carolina. We lived in a small tenant house next door to my grandparents and my great grandparents. It was a little town called Sally, and it was known as the chitlin capital of the world. And they had a small festival there every year where they had a parade and they had a pageant where they selected a chitlin queen. And then bands came and played on flatbed trailers in the street. And they sold about $20,000 worth of chitlins, which paid the entire city budget for a whole year. And so it was a great thing, and it was just a magical time. My great grandparents and my grandparents lived right next door to us, and my great uncle had a store on Main Street. And I used to ride my tricycle around and eat his candy and listen to old stories. And it was just a simple, rewarding time in my life.
Yeah, that's great. So those musicians at the Chitlin Festival, is that how you got your start in music or how you got interested in music?
Well, those are my earliest memories of seeing musicians, and they were mostly country and bluegrass bands. And yeah, I can remember being mesmerized by the music, and those are my earliest memories of seeing musicians play.
So how did you start playing yourself then?
Well, my maternal grandfather bought me a Yamaha guitar from a pawn shop when I was 9 years old. And he paid $100 for it, which was a lot of money because he was a mailman. And that at that time, that was about a week's salary. And he started taking me to his barber shop where they had a group that played down there, and he played harmonica with them. And that was where I started learning to play. The barber down there, Mr. Ike Johnson, taught me three chords. And so that was the first experience actually playing music myself. But I really give credit for my first professional music job to Mr. Wilder Funk. My maternal grandparents lived in Lake City, South Carolina, directly across the street from the East Main Drive-In Theater. And it was run by a man named Wilder Funk. I always thought that was a great name for a band, so later on I named a band the Wilder Funk Band after him. But I knew Folsom Prison Blues, and my grandfather took me across the street and introduced me to Mr. Funk, and I sang Folsom Prison Blues for him, and he got such a chuckle out of it that during the intermission of the movie, he let me sing Folsom Prison Blues over the loudspeaker. And I can remember hearing the people applauding out in the car, and I think that was what really hooked me on playing music. I think that Christmas I got a Mr. Microphone. So,
Yeah. Any other musical influences in your family?
well, my mother majored in music at Anderson College, and she was our church organist and pianist when I was growing up. And she continues that today. She's the organist at Folly Beach United Methodist Church.
Oh, wow.
And so she was my biggest supporter and also my harshest critic. Mm-hmm. But I would not be doing what I'm doing today if it were not for my mother.
Absolutely, that's great. So how did you get from there to where you are today? Tell us a little bit about your musical career from there.
Well, I played in my first band when I was 14 years old, and I played in my first professional gig in a bar when I was 16, and I wasn't even old enough to be in the bar. And my parents just found out about that a few years ago. But I played in bands throughout high school, and we played parties, house parties, and that kind of thing. I went to college, and I did miserably and failed out of college. And I started a band called the Abilenes. And I met a man named Charlie Mitchell, who was a professional steel guitar player. He played in Nashville for about 10 years, a studio musician, played with Tanya Tucker, and he played in Confederate Railroad in Augusta, Georgia. And I met a fiddle player named Phil Hurd and a bass player named Billy Swan, who played with a band called the Muffins, and they had some commercial success. And so I put this band together that was, at the time, the complete Nashville sound in South Carolina. And we played all the big country music clubs like the Skyline Club in Columbia, Desperado and the Lazy Bee here in Charleston, the Silver Spur. Played all over South Carolina, Savannah, Augusta, Asheville, Spartanburg area. And we traveled a lot, worked hard, and came home broke every weekend. So I moved to Charleston in 1996, and I started a band called Virgil Kane. And there was some young guys and myself, and we wrote alternative rock songs about hard drinking and hard living, and songs that we mimicked our lives, actually. But I ended up in a drug and alcohol rehab in 2003 and hit the reset button and asked the Lord to start leading my life because I wasn't doing a very good job of it. And things changed for me then at that point. And I was able to make a living playing music. And I began singing and playing in church, which continues to be the most rewarding part of my music career.
That's great. Can you tell us about the song that we're going to be playing today, The Seeds You Sow?
Well, the song was produced by Dave Britt in Columbia, Solid Entertainment. And he and Adam Gould, I give them all the credit for making that record happen. I was in a terrible creative slump in my life, and they believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And so I wrote this song, and it really kind of incorporates aspects of both of my grandfathers. They were both strong, God-fearing Christian men, and they just had everything to do with making me the person that I am today. And so I wrote it kind of as a tribute to both of my grandfathers.
Well, that's great. I look forward to playing it with you today. Everyone, this is Pernell McDaniel. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
3, 4. Granddaddy was a hard-working country man. By the sweat of his brow, he worked his land. He started his day at the break of dawn and took care of us till we were grown. When the cotton got high and the winter came on, and the days got short and the nights got long, we'd sit by the fire and the Bible he read, and he'd warn us to do what the good book said. He said, young man, what'll you do when this old world is through with you? Young man, what do you know? What'll become of the seeds you sow? The seeds you sow. When the sun sank low in the western sky, he'd talk about the days before Grandma died. And we say a little prayer, our soul she'd save. And we'd all kneel and Granddaddy would pray. And sometimes we'd go, but he would stay. He'd say, young man, what'll you do when this old world is through with you? Young man, what do you know? What'll become of the seeds you sow? The seeds you sow. Joined his one true love. There was never one man I was prouder of. No, there'll never be another one like him. Never was before, never will again. Say, young man, what'll you do when this old world is through with you? Young man, what do you know? What'll become of the seeds you sow? He'd say, young man, what'll you do when this whole world is through with you?
MUFIC sets you free.